October 25th, 1944. 06:48 hours. Off the coast of Samar Island, Philippines. Admiral Kurita stood on the bridge of the battleship Yamato when his lookout's voice cracked over the intercom. Surface contacts, multiple vessels, bearing 090, distance 32 kilometers. Kurita raised his binoculars toward the gray morning horizon. What he saw made no sense. Aircraft carriers, American fleet carriers, at least 6 of them, possibly more, their distinctive silhouettes unmistakable even at this distance. Behind them, a screen of cruisers and destroyers in defensive formation. He lowered the binoculars slowly. His hands were steady, but his mind raced through impossible calculations. Those carriers should not be here, could not be here. Intelligence had placed Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet, the massive carrier force that was the pride of the Pacific Fleet, hundreds of miles north, pursuing the Japanese Northern Force. The entire operational plan depended on that fact. Yet here they were, 6 fleet carriers, the most powerful warships in the American arsenal, exactly where they were supposed to be absent, exactly where Japanese planning had assumed they would not be. Kurita turned to his operations officer. "Confirm those identifications. I need to know what we are facing." Within minutes, the reports flooded in from other ships in the formation. Carrier contacts confirmed. Large vessels, multiple escorts. The Americans had positioned their main battle fleet directly across the path to Leyte Gulf, where American forces were landing reinforcements on Philippine beaches just 40 miles away. The moment represented the culmination of the most complex naval battle in history. 4 separate Japanese task forces, approaching from different directions, executing a plan designed to destroy American invasion forces in one decisive engagement. The plan required perfect timing, complete coordination, and most critically, it required the American carriers to be somewhere else. Now those carriers were here, and Admiral Kurita faced a decision that would be debated by historians for generations. The crisis facing Japan in October 1944 was existential. American forces had advanced across the Pacific in a grinding campaign lasting 3 years. The defensive perimeter Japan had established in 1942 was collapsing. Most critically, American forces were now positioned to cut Japan's access to oil from the Dutch East Indies. Without oil, the Imperial Navy could not operate. Without oil, the situation was hopeless. Admiral Toyoda, Commander-in-Chief of the Combined Fleet, understood the mathematics perfectly. In a September directive, he outlined the reality without illusion. If we lose the Philippines, the fleet will lose its source of fuel. The outcome becomes inevitable. The Philippines must be defended with all available strength. The Japanese Navy devised Operation Sho-Go, the most ambitious naval operation since Midway. 4 separate forces would converge on Leyte Gulf from different directions. The Northern Force, consisting of 4 aircraft carriers with minimal air groups, would serve as bait to lure away the American carrier fleet. While the American carriers chased north, 3 other Japanese forces would strike the invasion beaches from multiple directions. Admiral Kurita commanded the center force, the main striking element. His force included the Yamato and her sister ship Musashi, the 2 largest battleships ever constructed. Each displaced over 70,000 tons. Each mounted 9 460mm main guns, the largest naval rifles ever built. Behind them came 3 more battleships, 10 heavy cruisers, and 15 destroyers. This was the force that would hammer the invasion beaches once the American carriers were gone. The plan was brilliant in conception. It exploited American operational patterns that Japanese intelligence had observed repeatedly. American carriers were aggressive. When targets presented themselves, American commanders attacked. The bait would be irresistible. The American fleet would pursue, leaving the landing beaches vulnerable. But the plan required perfect execution, and it required one critical assumption to hold true. The American carriers had to take the bait. On October 23rd, the operation began. Kurita's center force departed Brunei, heading through the Philippine archipelago. American submarines spotted them immediately. In a bold night attack, submarines launched torpedoes into the Japanese formation. 2 heavy cruisers exploded and sank. Admiral Kurita transferred his flag to Yamato amid the chaos. On October 24th, American carrier aircraft from Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet found Kurita's force in the Sibuyan Sea. Wave after wave of bombers attacked throughout the day. The battleship Musashi absorbed over 20 torpedo hits and 17 bomb strikes before capsizing. Other ships suffered damage. The American attacks were relentless. Kurita's force turned away temporarily. American pilots reported the Japanese were retreating. Admiral Halsey received these reports with satisfaction. The center force appeared to be withdrawing. Then came the report Halsey had been waiting for. Northern force spotted. Japanese carriers located approximately 300 miles north of Leyte Gulf. 4 carriers confirmed. Admiral Ozawa's bait had been seen. For Halsey, the choice was clear. Aircraft carriers were the dominant weapons of Pacific naval warfare. The Japanese carriers represented the primary threat. At 20:22 hours on October 24th, Admiral Halsey ordered the Third Fleet north. All available carrier groups, all fast battleships, all cruisers and destroyers. The entire striking power of the Pacific Fleet turned away from Leyte Gulf and headed north. The Japanese plan was working perfectly. Admiral Kurita, after turning away from the air attacks, did not withdraw. He waited for nightfall, then resumed his advance. His force transited San Bernardino Strait after midnight, emerging into the Philippine Sea in darkness. No American forces guarded the strait. The path to Leyte Gulf was open. At 06:45 hours on October 25th, his lookout spotted American ships off Samar Island. The first reports identified fleet carriers. What Kurita had actually found was Task Unit 77.4.3, call sign Taffy 3. This unit consisted of 6 escort carriers, 3 destroyers, and 4 destroyer escorts. The escort carriers were small, slow vessels built on merchant ship hulls, designed to provide air support for ground forces. They carried fewer aircraft than fleet carriers. They could not outrun battleships. They had minimal armor and light defensive armament. Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague commanded Taffy 3 from the escort carrier Fanshawe Bay. At 06:47 hours, his radar picked up surface contacts to the north. Within minutes, lookouts spotted pagoda masts on the horizon. Moments later, colored splashes began falling around the American formation as Japanese heavy cruisers opened fire. Sprague could not believe the reports. Japanese battleships should not be here. The mathematics were brutal. Yamato alone displaced more tonnage than all 6 escort carriers combined. Yamato's main guns could fire shells over 25 miles. The escort carrier's defensive guns had ranges measured in hundreds of yards. Kurita had 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, and 11 destroyers. Against him stood 6 escort carriers and 7 small warships. Sprague's first message was simple and desperate. "Enemy battleships and cruisers firing on us. Request immediate assistance." Then he ordered all aircraft to launch and attack with whatever they carried. He ordered his 3 destroyers to attack. Commander Ernest Evans of USS Johnston did not wait for orders. At 07:07 hours, Johnston turned directly toward the Japanese fleet and accelerated to flank speed, charging alone toward 4 battleships and multiple cruisers. Evans addressed his crew. "A large Japanese fleet has been contacted. They are 15 miles away and headed in our direction. We will attack." Johnston raced through the smoke, closing to within 10 miles before launching torpedoes. One torpedo struck the heavy cruiser Kumano, blowing off her bow. Johnston then turned her guns on the cruiser, firing over 200 rounds before Japanese return fire began hitting the destroyer. The other two destroyers, Hole and Heerman, followed Johnston's charge. Destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts joined the attack. These small ships charged directly into Kurita's formation, launching torpedoes, firing guns, creating smoke screens, drawing fire away from the escort carriers. The Japanese, expecting fleet carriers with heavy escorts, suddenly found themselves under attack by wildly maneuvering destroyers launching torpedoes at close range. The confusion was immediate. Japanese formations broke apart to avoid torpedoes. Ships maneuvered independently. The careful approach dissolved into chaos. Aircraft from the escort carriers pressed attacks continuously. Pilots made repeated runs, dropping bombs, firing rockets, strafing with machine guns. When ordnance ran out, pilots made dummy runs, diving at Japanese ships to force them to maneuver. The escort carriers fled south, launching and recovering aircraft while under fire. Shells fell around them constantly. The carriers twisted and turned, hiding in rain squalls, laying smoke screens, doing everything possible to avoid the shells. Johnston absorbed hit after hit, but continued fighting. Her forward guns were disabled. Her bridge was wrecked. Commander Evans, wounded multiple times, continued directing his ship from the shattered bridge. Finally, overwhelmed by cruiser fire, Johnston slowed and began to sink. Evans was last seen on the bridge as Johnston capsized. Hole took over 40 hits before her engine room flooded and she lost power. Dead in the water, she continued firing until magazines exploded. Samuel B. Roberts absorbed hits from battleship guns before fires, spreading, forced her crew to abandon ship. The escort carrier Gambier Bay, unable to outrun Japanese cruisers, absorbed shells until she slowed and sank. But the resistance, desperate and improvised, achieved what seemed impossible. It delayed Kurita's advance. It disrupted his formations. Most critically, it convinced him he faced something other than escort carriers. The ferocity of the destroyer attacks suggested fleet destroyers. The constant air attacks suggested multiple fleet carriers beyond visual range. Radio intercepts suggested reinforcements were approaching. At 0911 hours, after over 2 hours of combat, with the escort carriers visible and vulnerable before him, Admiral Kurita ordered his forces to break off and withdraw. The decision stunned his subordinates. Victory was within reach. The escort carriers could be destroyed within the hour. Leyte Gulf lay 40 miles away, undefended. But Kurita believed he faced a trap. The resistance suggested fleet carriers nearby. His formation was scattered. His ships had suffered damage. Fuel was becoming critical. His judgment, clouded by fatigue and unexpected resistance, led him to withdraw. The center force turned north, away from Leyte Gulf. The primary striking force of Operation Sho-Go, having come within miles of its objective, withdrew without accomplishing its mission. Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet had steamed north through the night, pursuing Admiral Ozawa's carriers. At dawn on October 25th, American carrier aircraft launched against the northern force. Over several hours, American aircraft attacked in waves. Ozawa's carriers, with minimal air groups, could mount only token resistance. One by one, the carriers absorbed hits and began sinking. But at 0707 hours, while Halsey's aircraft were preparing to launch, he received Sprague's desperate message. "Under attack by Japanese battleships and cruisers. Request immediate assistance." The attack was coming from San Bernardino Strait. Kurita's center force had not withdrawn. It had transited the strait during the night. Now it was engaging American forces protecting the invasion beaches. Admiral Chester Nimitz, monitoring communications from Hawaii, sent a message to Halsey at 1000 hours. "Where is Task Force 34? The message, with communication padding not removed, reached Halsey as, "Where is Task Force 34, the world wonders?" Halsey faced an impossible choice. His carriers were 300 miles north, engaged in destroying Ozawa's carriers. If he turned south immediately, he would need 6 hours to reach the battle. By then, the engagement would be over. Halsey ordered his battleships to detach and race south at maximum speed, but they would arrive hours too late. Off Samar, the situation had seemed hopeless. Sprague's escort carriers were under fire from battleships they could not outrun. His destroyers had charged to their doom, buying time. Aircraft were attacking with insufficient weapons. Then, inexplicably, the Japanese turned away. Sprague watched as the Japanese formation began opening range. Within 20 minutes, the Japanese fleet was withdrawing. "They had us," Sprague said later. "They had us cold. We could not have lasted another 30 minutes. Then they just left. I still do not understand why." The survivors counted their losses. Johnston, Hole, Samuel B. Roberts, and Gambier Bay were gone. Over 1,000 sailors had perished, but the force had survived. The invasion beaches had survived. Admiral Kurita's withdrawal sparked immediate controversy. His reasoning was recorded in his action report. The fierce resistance suggested fleet carriers with strong escorts in the area. American radio traffic indicated additional forces converging. Our formation was scattered. Fuel status was critical. Withdrawal preserved the fleet for future operations. But there were no fleet carriers in the area. The fierce resistance came from escort carriers and destroyers that sacrificed themselves. The additional forces Kurita feared were hundreds of miles away. What Kurita faced was not the American Pacific Fleet. It was 6 escort carriers and 7 small warships that fought with such desperation they created the illusion of a much larger force. The Ghost Fleet existed only in Kurita's perception. The Battle of Leyte Gulf resulted in decisive American victory. Japan lost 4 carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers. Over 10,000 Japanese sailors perished. American losses were significant but sustainable. 1 light carrier, 2 escort carriers, 2 destroyers, 1 destroyer escort, and approximately 3,000 casualties. More importantly, Japan lost the gamble. Operation Sho-Go had been designed as the decisive battle that would preserve Japan's access to critical resources. Instead, it destroyed the offensive capability of the combined fleet without achieving any strategic objectives. The Battle of Leyte Gulf demonstrated principles of naval warfare that remain relevant today, while highlighting human factors that determine outcomes in complex operations. Admiral Kurita's decision to withdraw illustrates how perception shapes reality in combat. He faced what he believed to be overwhelming force. The actual situation was dramatically different, but Kurita made decisions based on information available to him. His choice was not irrational, given what he thought he faced. It was simply wrong. This gap between perception and reality was created by the desperate actions of Taffy 3. Commander Evans charging Johnston toward battleships, pilots making attack runs without weapons, escort carriers maneuvering like fleet carriers. These actions, born of necessity, created an impression of strength that did not exist. Rear Admiral Sprague reflected years later. "We fought because we had no choice. Running was impossible. So we attacked with everything we had, which was not much. Somehow it was enough. When we attacked instead of running, it confused them. That confusion saved us." The battle also demonstrated mission focus. Admiral Ozawa's northern force succeeded completely despite being destroyed. His carriers drew away Halsey's fleet exactly as planned. The American carriers went north. Ozawa's sacrifice created the opportunity for Kurita to strike. That Kurita failed to exploit it does not diminish Ozawa's success. Vice Admiral Ozawa acknowledged this in his report. The Northern Force accomplished its mission. We drew away the American carriers. Our loss was expected and accepted. That the Center Force did not achieve its objective was beyond our control. The human cost was staggering. Over 13,000 sailors from both sides perished. Commander Ernest Evans was never recovered. He posthumously received the Medal of Honor. His citation read, "In the face of overwhelming odds, he charged the enemy with complete disregard for his own safety. The engagement marked the end of the battleship era. The future of naval combat lay with carriers and aircraft, confirmed definitively at Leyte Gulf. For Japan, the battle represented the end of any hope for naval victory. The combined fleet's offensive power was destroyed. Admiral Toyota acknowledged the result in November. The fleet has ceased to exist as an offensive force. The decisive battle has been fought. The outcome was not favorable." For the United States Navy, Leyte Gulf validated carrier-centric doctrine, but it also demonstrated the value of smaller vessels and courage of crews facing overwhelming odds. The destroyers and destroyer escorts of Taffy III became legendary. Their actions were studied as examples of courage and aggressive tactics. The principle they demonstrated, that small forces attacking aggressively can achieve results beyond their apparent capability, influenced naval doctrine for decades. But the battle exposed weaknesses in American command. The divided structure between Halsey's Third Fleet and Kincaid's Seventh Fleet created gaps. No one guarded San Bernardino Strait because each admiral assumed the other was responsible. Only Taffy III's resistance prevented catastrophe. Admiral Nimitz was blunt in his review. The command arrangements were unclear. Responsibility was not explicitly assigned. This created a dangerous gap. This must not happen again. Admiral Halsey addressed the controversy in his memoirs. "I believed the carrier force represented the primary threat. I expected other forces to handle any surface threat from Kurita. That assumption nearly proved catastrophic. If not for the extraordinary courage of Taffy III, the results could have been disastrous. I bear responsibility for that risk." The individual heroism displayed became part of naval legend. Stories of destroyers charging battleships, pilots attacking without weapons, escort carriers fighting like fleet carriers, all entered Navy culture. Military historians identify Leyte Gulf as the largest naval battle in history, measured by tonnage, geographic scope, and complexity. 4 separate major engagements occurred simultaneously across hundreds of miles. The battle validated principles central to naval doctrine today. Aggressive action forces opponents to react. Creating uncertainty provides advantage even without material superiority. Clear command relationships prevent gaps and confusion. Training and morale matter as much as technology. For sailors who fought at Leyte Gulf, the battle was a defining experience. The fear of facing overwhelming force, the determination to fight despite impossible odds. The bewilderment when the enemy withdrew from certain victory. Ensign William Brooks described his experience decades later. "We attacked Japanese battleships with bombs meant for ground targets. We made runs without weapons just to force them to maneuver. It was terrifying and exhilarating. When they withdrew, none of us could believe it." Japanese sailors carried different memories. Petty Officer Haruki Iki wrote in his diary, "We saw the American carriers. We were in range. Then we turned away. The order made no sense. We could have destroyed them. I do not understand why." The Battle of Leyte Gulf accomplished what Operation Sho-Go was designed to prevent. American forces secured the Philippines. Japan's access to oil was cut. The combined fleet became increasingly irrelevant. The ghost fleet that Admiral Kurita believed he faced never existed except in perception. But that perception, created by courage and desperation, changed the battle's course. 6 escort carriers and 7 small warships fought as though they were the entire Pacific Fleet. For a few critical hours, that illusion was enough. Admiral Sprague, when asked years later how Taffy 3 survived, gave a simple answer. "We fought because we had no choice. We won because the Japanese believed we were something we were not. I cannot explain it any other way." The lessons remain studied today. The importance of aggressive action when outmatched, the value of creating uncertainty in enemy perceptions, the danger of unverified assumptions, the necessity of clear command, the reality that battles are won by people, not just equipment. When Japanese admirals saw what they believed were fleet carriers that morning, they reacted to a threat they thought they understood. When they encountered fierce resistance that should have been quickly overcome, their assumptions shaped their decisions. The Ghost Fleet was real enough in their minds to change history.